Hello, and welcome to the Natural State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin. It is my belief that the natural state of any living organism is health, and that our artificial habitat has forced us into having artificial health problems. This show is my attempt to dive deep and learn about using nutrition, sleep, movement, relationships, and more to help you reclaim your natural state of health in a modern world and show you how to thrive in an environment that's stacked against you. If you enjoyed today's show, you can find out more details and information at dranthonygustin.com. Today on my podcast, I welcome my friend Carly Johnson. And as I say in the beginning of the episode when we record, she's one of the only people that I know of in my life that I surround myself with who forces me to upgrade my thinking around health and teaches me a lot about where I'm missing the mark and where I can improve. Her specialty is involved more so in trying to figure out how is the environment we spend most of the time in, which is our house, impacting our lives and our health. And so, there's a lot that I've learned from her over the last couple of years around water filtration, paint, rugs, carpet, skincare products, cleaning products, etc. And she's what I would consider an expert in this space. So it was fun for me to have the microphones on to record a conversation that is pretty normal for us when we hang out. I know we're freaks, but we're into this stuff and love it. So I'm glad you guys were able to tune into this one, and I hope you learn a lot and enjoy. This show is brought to you by Alitura Naturals. When I considered sponsors for this show, I reached out to Andy, who is the founder of Alitura, and pretty much begged him to support the show just because they are the only products that I trust to put on my skin. So much garbage is in skincare products that it blows my mind. I cannot find any other products. I do not put anything else on my body other than Alitura. It's actually a lie. I use White Oak Pasture's beef tallow soap in the shower, but other than that, everything sort of pre-post around that is Alitura. And if you don't know why, your skin is the largest organ in your body. It absorbs everything you put on it. And men are less known for using sort of skincare products, but women average over 250 chemicals that are in their bloodstream from their skincare products by the time they walk out the door in the morning. That is ridiculous. I personally use the moisturizer, the clay mask in my sauna, and the Pearl cleanser. My fiance uses way more. She has a little bit more of a skincare routine than I. And the products themselves are made with the highest end ingredients that you would ever find in skincare products. This stuff's incredible. Andy himself is a testament how these products work. He's been on the podcast before to tell his story, but it was amazing. He was in a horrific accident. His face got all mangled up, and he basically made this formula to heal his scars, and he is now a male model. That is not a joke. He has incredible skin and is obsessed with the quality of his ingredients and the sourcing of them. He was just in Hawaii recently sourcing one ingredient of the many that are in one of his products. This guy goes, visits every single farm and product, and it is incredible. The quality you get here is by far the best in the industry. And so I begged him to sponsor the show and also begged him to give you guys a little bit of a hookup. So if you use code AG20, you'll get 20% off in free shipping over at alitura.com. That's AG20 at ALITURA to get 20% off your order at alitura.com. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to chat about our sponsor, Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto is all about making a ketogenic diet healthy and accessible. Whether you're reading all of our online guides or articles or enjoying Perfect Keto's exogenous ketones or any other keto-friendly products, everything you need to make keto work for you is at perfectketo.com. I know what you're thinking. Hey, aren't you the founder of Perfect Keto? Yep, that's right. And all of my insanely high standards have been put into making each and every product. My background as a functional medicine clinician helps me craft the cleanest and healthiest possible products and the best information about a ketogenic diet. Head on over to perfectketo.com to learn anything you need to know about the ketogenic diet. And if you've never tried any of our products before, feel free to use the code KETOPODCAST for 20% off your first order. With that being said, let's get into the show. Carly, thank you for joining me today.
Hello. How's it going?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited to have you on just because I was thinking about this earlier, and you are one of, I think, 3 people I was counting in my head of people that I spend time with who actually influence me to be healthier and teach me something about health. I think that I'm always the freak and the psychopath being like, no, do this, do that thing. And don't you know about this? I think you're one of 3 people that I know that I spend any reasonable time with. So I really appreciate you for that. And I'm excited to dig into some stuff that you're far more of an expert at than I am.
Well, I'm honored to hear you say that. I feel the same way about you. And it's nice to have a friend where I can go to their house and eat dinner and know that the food I'm going to be putting in my body is healthy and I approve of it. So I am really happy to have forged a friendship with y'all.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that just starting with your background would be super interesting. Given that you don't have sort of a traditional entry into all this stuff. And I think that the most powerful people in sort of the health and wellness space have had found a circuitous way where they've dealt with their own problems to get there. I think that it just means so much more than I think, even if someone has an MD or something like that and have been classically trained, they just don't care as much generally. It's just like, oh, yeah, I'm interested in healthcare. So I think it's far more powerful in that way. Like I think that you've gone through quite a lot yourself. So I'm just curious, when was it that your mindset shifted of, okay, I'm doing this thing and now all I'm going to focus on is my time to help the world is helping people be healthier?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I never thought I'd be in the health industry, and health was never important to me. I always took my health for granted growing up. I ate a very standard American diet. Health wasn't prioritized in my home. And when I was in my mid-20s, I started coming down with symptoms that were really strange for me. So my skin started itching all over. I had terrible brain fog. My blood sugar, I felt like I was on a roller coaster all the time. My mood instability in connection to that was off the charts. I didn't know what was coming. And I had a sensation that made it seem like it was really hard to swallow, and went to all these different specialists, and I finally got diagnosed with Hashimoto's. And for those of you who are familiar with thyroid test results, my TSH was at 150. It should be between 0 and 2. So I was in a really, really rough place. And I did everything that my conventional endocrinologist at UCLA Health, really good hospital, told me to do. And I kept getting worse and worse. I took the medication, I rested, but started working from home more. My symptoms, joint pain started flaring up. And I got to the point where I just started searching randomly with my boyfriend, who's now my husband, online for anything that would help because I was in such a rough spot. And I found other people sharing their stories about hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's and how changing their diet and going to a doctor who looked at the problem as an immune system problem instead of a thyroid problem, how that changed their life. It was completely foreign to me. I never knew different types of doctors existed. I didn't know how to cook at all. So changing my diet felt so monumental. Mm-hmm. But I started doing little things that this woman had talked about and started working with a new doctor, healed things like parasites and candida, and learned that everything in my body is connected. Health really matters, and I can't take it for granted like I had for the 25 years before that.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it crazy that I have so many people that I know have this experience where they went to conventional doctors, they had all these problems, and then went on the internet and figured out a different solution. We're a very lucky generation where we could do that. I think a lot of these problems actually started sprouting up decades ago. There's probably 30 plus years of people that had this thing. They go, oh, well, my doctor doesn't know, so I'll just suffer with this and die with this.
Totally. If I would have accepted what my doctor told me, I don't know where I'd be right now. My life, I'd be miserable. I would maybe still be bedridden. I'm so glad that I said there has to be something different and questioned what my doctor said, just on pure instinct that something had to change, something had to be out there for me.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of questionable things about the internet these days and how it affects people, but I think there's a lot of just miracle things. Like you can go online and even if it's not a doctor, you can find other people who've had the same problems and treat it in a little bit less conventional way. So what was sort of the healing journey for you? You talked about changing your food, doing some of these different protocols, but what were the steps that you aha moments maybe where you go, oh, this really matters. Gluten needs to be out. Yeah. This needs to be out.
The biggest things for me were getting off hormonal birth control. I had been on it for 10 years. And I think that really contributed to the state of my gut and my thyroid, which at the time, my gut, I had candida overgrowth, I had H. pylori, I had leaky gut, I had, you name it, it was pretty much there. And again, someone who never thought that their gut was connected to their overall health, I really just thought, oh, I was diagnosed with a thyroid problem. It's just my thyroid. I got to fix it. Maybe medication will do it. All of these things felt so new and fresh that I was pretty skeptical. So it took a little while after diagnosis to really lean in to the fact that I could actually change things. But it was getting off birth control. It was going off gluten 100%, which I still am. And that's huge for me. It was healing my gut, and it was taking responsibility for my health. I think the reason it was hard for those first couple of years and I couldn't fully accept that I could change is because I wasn't willing to say, this is on me. I have to do the work, and I need to step up for my body and my life to make changes so I can show up as a different person.
Yeah. And so you talk about a lot of different things, like you had to change the ability to cook, things like that. And there's so many different ways to approach that. If somebody's sort of living the way that you used to live before, I mean, what are some of the things that I guess people have to prepare? Like you said, ownership around health. Like what does that contain in your mind?
Oh my gosh. It's hard to put into words, but I used to think that the world would do well for me. So like I'd go to a restaurant and it was their responsibility to have a gluten-free menu, or my husband would cook all our meals gluten-free when he was the one cooking. It was just like that mindset shift that was like, this is my body, this is my life. My actions matter, and I have to be the one to learn to cook. I have to be the one to prepare things. I have to be the one to step up for myself. And so that's one side of it. That was mindset side of it. But literally learning a new skill, which was learning to make my own food. I had never done that before. Every food that I had eaten before the age of 25 had been a heat up, pocket or packet from the grocery store, or I had eaten out somewhere at a restaurant. And so I got a cookbook and I decided I was going to cook through the whole thing. It was a gluten-free cookbook. And I just went recipe by recipe, and I effed up a lot of them. I oversalted, I undercooked, any mistake you can think of, I made it. But I started acquiring little skills, and I learned how ovens and baking worked. I literally I'm talking beginner stuff here, but I had to acquire it. And by the end, I started building confidence, and I was like, okay, I can follow recipes. Oh, these flavors go together. Oh, beef and XYZ make a good meal. So I had the background knowledge I needed to move forward in a way that would help my health and my body.
Yeah. I mean, the cooking thing is a really interesting one because I think that every human has a lot of biases around the world and how it works. And I was lucky enough when I was really, really young. I mean, I think that a chef was sort of like one of the things that I aspired to. And my dad taught me how to cook when I was, 5, 6, 7. And I had always known how to cook, and I never used recipes, even when I was eating unhealthily. And so when I shifted to eating healthy, and like that sort of spectrum happens over a long period of time for a lot of people. I didn't have any sort of like, oh, I need to do this now. It's just like, what do you mean recipe? Tell me the ingredients in it and I can make it, and I can make it taste good. And so I don't have a lot of, I always forget for people that cooking is a huge thing. And I have friends here who are 30 plus years old who don't know how to boil an egg.
Right.
I'm like, what? And I totally forget that this is the thing that people need to learn sometimes.
And I could have been that person. Honestly, if my health hadn't have declined, there wouldn't have been a reason for me to learn how to cook. My life was fine the way it was. But it's now, when we have kids in a few years, them learning to cook is so high on my priority list, because I do think being able to provide your own healthy food, being able to create that, is a foundation for health. And I think there are very few people who can get by not cooking and still live a healthy life.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these weird sort of cycles that it's reinforcing. So for instance, you're talking about like, you thought the world should take care of you. I think that's not just you. I think that's just an American mindset. And I think that we just don't have any sort of self-reliance anymore as individuals. We never taught that growing up. At least I don't think our generation was. And so you think about cooking, it's just like these things, like we then now have apps that you can have 15 different apps that like make it so you can have fine dining at home in 15 minutes. Like the more convenience that we have, the less we feel like we need to be self-reliant. And like that cycle just keeps turning and turning and turning. And very few people, I think, like when you give humans convenience, it's very hard to take it away. Very hard. It's like I've chatted with some people, entrepreneurs, like, how do you make cooking convenient? Like, what are the ways you can do that? I mean, like Miles, for example, is launching this like spice line, mother tongue, that's like, okay, how do we try to get people to cook more? Our friends who's a chef, and it's like, there's so much to be done in this area. So like any entrepreneurs listening to this podcast, like try to help people cook. Like I just don't have that lens because again, like I've cooked my whole life, so I don't have a lot of solutions there, but it's like super interesting. Like maybe a Peloton for cooking would be really cool or something like that.
Yeah. And there are things like I know my parents use some meal delivery systems where all the ingredients come bagged up and then they can make a meal easier than they would have without all the individualized measured ingredients, the recipe right there. But that's kind of the only innovation I've seen other than going to the grocery store and picking up pre-made Snap Kitchen meals, or having your own private chef, which are things that all of those things I've utilized in the past, but I never feel as good as when I'm cooking my own food.
Yeah. And, you know, we talk about these food delivery service things. There's a spectrum of all stuff in health, in nutrition, especially in cooking. And I think that is certainly better than, for instance, going and eating fast food takeout. However, then you're still getting like everything, like you have to ship stuff refrigerated across the United States. And like the amount of energy that it takes to do that is insane. And like the packaging waste, like I was around some family when they used one of these things once, like to make one meal, it's like every single thing was in a plastic container. It's like blowing my mind. And there's like still vegetable oils and things like that in it. I don't think there's a spectrum, and it's like, that's better for sure. And like, I think it's a bridge. I'm always thinking about where are people at and where should they be long-term and how do you create a good bridge for them? I think it could be a bridge for a lot of people, but going back to your point around, if you weren't sick, you would have never realized that you needed to do this. And I think that unfortunately what happens with a lot of people and their health and how they perceive it, sort of similar to if you're driving on a highway and a bunch of bugs hit your windshield over the course of 4 or 5, 6 hours, a couple of days, you don't realize how dirty it gets until it gets clean. And I think there's sometimes where like, if you're driving down the highway and a rock hits your windshield and busts through it, like for you have these big aha moments, but the majority of people, it's a slow, insidious creep. And the people just think it's normal to live in a state of however they feel. I think it's getting older. That's how I should feel.
Oh, that bugs me so much. And I look back at what I let my normal become on a day-to-day basis, and I cannot believe how poorly I felt and just accepted it as this is who I am. The brain fog, horrible brain fog, the blood sugar roller coasters, the mood instability. Like I said, I don't live with those things anymore. And I don't know how for years I let that just be part of my life.
Yeah, it creeps up. And I think that a lot of people have this, and then their aha moment is it's too late to have a heart attack. They're diagnosed with cancer. It's an irreversible thing. And this is why it's like so challenging to be able to motivate people. I think that in general, when you're looking at the spectrum of health, if people don't have a reason or like a big life change, generally speaking, they don't make a lot of changes. Like this has been sort of the way I view the world is how do I help people make better health choices over the last 15 years, probably. And I've noticed a consistent theme. Like if there's not a family or friend or something like that dies or is diagnosed with some condition, maybe a newborn child, there's like a big life event, moving to a city, having new friends, that being diagnosed yourself is something like health changes are like our environment is structured in a way where no one's incentivized to dig deep and be like, oh, could I feel better? I mean, there's a bunch of geeks in San Francisco and people that I know like in the productivity space that like biohacking their way through because they want to be more productive. Like I think that's one path, but for the majority of Americans, like there needs to be sort of this aha moment. Like, I don't know how you get there otherwise. I don't know if you've seen that in the same way with other people.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And if you are someone who's taking steps to make your lifestyle or your day-to-day a little healthier, there is a general view that it's an extreme or weird thing to do. I think that it's something we have to overcome as a society, that making an asserted effort to be healthy is not weird. It's not extreme. It's actually necessary in today's day and age.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if it's Mark Twain or some over quoted quote, but it's like whenever you find yourself on the side of majority, it's time to pause and reflect. And I think that's the same thing with all orthodox health or just like normal, like, oh, we just eat this way because we eat this way.
Right.
I think that it requires a lot of, I think, self-reflection to be able to do that and be like, okay. And this is why I think programs like Whole30, for example, are really effective. It seems extreme just to eat real food for a month. But then people afterwards, they clean their windshield and they go, oh my God, like I actually felt like this before. Or they reintroduce foods and they go, oh man, I felt like this. This is how my normal was, like you said. And I'm sure now you still at a time, maybe like, I think you told me when you were traveling, sometimes like in Japan, like you may eat gluten, you're like, oh shit, this is all coming back and I have all these problems. And like, it's a reminder.
Yes.
Like, how do you approach sort of like how you modify things now moving forward? And like, do you have flare-ups? Like, the way I think about health is like, it's a never ending journey and you're never done with it. You and I are always geeking out about like, oh, you're getting this test, we're like working on this thing, taking these supplements. It's like, I always dig deep and figure out where I can optimize and like where I'm not sort of like my best self. And it's like, I'm just curious on like how you approach things now moving forward.
Yeah. Like where I am now and like what will cause different like changes.
Yeah. I think that some people, if they have these things, they think, oh, I'm a victim and I just have to live this way forever and poor me, instead of like sort of, like you said, taking ownership and moving forward. But like, how has your life changed? Do you have problems now? Do you have relapses, flare-ups, things like this?
Yeah. So I got into remission. I've had Hashimoto's now 6 years, and I got into remission 4 years ago. And I have had flare-ups in those 4 years, a lot of times after extended travel. That is a big thing for me. And then stress is a big thing for me.
What do you think it is about the extended travel?
Just not eating quality food most of the time. I've learned to accept I have a really sensitive body. I'm a sensitive person. I have a standard that I have to provide myself, whether it comes to food, supplements, the house I live in. It's just my reality. And so when I stray away from that, I'm not as resilient as some people. So my body breaks down a little bit or just doesn't function as it normally does. And so it's the food, it is lack of sleep, it is stress. Those things for me have been my biggest triggers. They've been the times that I've had to take a step back and kind of like recalibrate. And maybe, when I'm traveling, I tighten up my diet. So not only am I gluten-free, which I am 100% of the time, but I'll pull out eggs and nightshades, which have been problematic for me. So I always look at it as like I'm walking on a tightrope, and there are a million different things that can make me dip and other things that can help me come back up to a balanced state. And at home, I can get away with doing less to stay in a balanced state, but traveling, I might have to do a little bit more. So that means more supplementation, a lot of digestive enzymes, more sleep, a lot more meditation. And so it is this constant balancing act of what do I need right now? And that's a question I've learned to ask myself over the last 6 years is, what do I need right now? Okay, how can I provide that? What do I have to say no to get those things or to prioritize those things?
Yeah. And what I really enjoy about your perspective is this, you don't let this ruin your life. You go, okay, travel is still important to me. How am I going to use and sort of like think about all the tools that I have and do this in a more thoughtful way and make it work, because I'm still going to enjoy my life. I think so many people, no matter what it is, play this victim role and go, oh, no, I can't ever do this thing again. Yeah.
And there was a time where traveling it was possible, but I didn't prioritize it because I was on really strict healing diets. I was on strict AIP. I'm talking no black pepper, nothing, for 6 entire months. And I was home and I was cooking every single meal. And I don't regret doing that. And that was a time where travel and drinking and partying, things like that, really weren't a part of my life. And I needed that at the time. But as I've been able to heal, that was a while ago, I can incorporate things like travel or more drinking or whatever it is I want to that may not be contributing to my health back into my life.
Right. And so you were talking earlier about sensitivity to stuff. And I think that everybody has a different resilience, like you said, and that the home is an environment for you that has shifted. And so like my concept of health is like, okay, if you modify your environment, have like a unnatural environment, you're going to screw up health in some way. I think there's a spectrum of all of this stuff, but I mean, humans should be living outside. That's kind of like where we were at all of human history and all of our evolutionary history. And like now we take these things for granted and we just live in these boxes that we just say, oh, this is normal. I was born into this world and this is how it's been all along. And this is how it's going to be moving forward. And looking at the time scale of human history and how long we've lived and what we live in now, and the amount of things that people just like, I think have blinders on. The home is the environment that you spend the majority of your time. Like what was this statistics that you said before? 90% of people.
I said that the average American spends 90% of their time indoors, and that's an EPA study.
So probably more.
Sorry?
So maybe more than that.
Yeah, it could be. It could be.
And now, especially, I think people generally don't have control about where their workplace is, but I think people are working from home far more, which they should have more control over that than work. Maybe some people are renting, don't have as much control, but this is something like people are spending so much of their time in their house and not realizing that like your environment, your house is your environment that you live in 90+% of the time. And that has a giant impact on your health. And there's so many different areas to go into here, but you're sort of like my go-to expert with anything home health.
Yeah.
So excited, like as people are listening, that's probably far more into, remote work, working at home. But this is like one of these untapped things regarding like optimizing health and like switching things around. So I'm just curious as far as like all of the buckets of health that you think of, how do you prioritize what people master first before they start digging into sort of home health and like healthy home?
Before home health?
Yeah. Or like, what's most important? Like, as you think through a hierarchy of, okay, it's not even worth focusing on this until like you stop eating McDonald's. Like how do you think about prioritizing some of these issues? Cause like it's an infinite optimization, just like eating food or movement or whatever. Like you can look at every single thing in your house as contributing to your health or taking away from it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And because there are so many simple, free things that people can do to create a healthier home environment, I think that at least starting that process is just as important as eating well, as moving your body, as sleeping. And I think that setting yourself up for success at home, reducing that toxin exposure in your indoor environment can actually help you do things like sleep better. You'll get better sleep quality. So I really do think they're all intertwined. There are things like putting in a whole house water filter, which I know we both have, or making sure that the paint on your walls is non-toxic, which we did in our new house. Those things aren't as important. Those can come down the line, further down the road. But things like opening your windows every single day for at least 10 minutes and throwing out candles and toxic candles and those Reed air fresheners and Glade plugins, those are free. They should be done right away because they're poisoning our body. Yeah. Plants in a home, really, really easy hacks just to freshen up that air. So I don't know if it's necessarily that, eating well, moving, home health are more or less important than one another. I think they all contribute to our overall health.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways to think about this and go in, but when you start making any changes in health, what I've noticed is that once you gain some momentum, it's so much easier to keep doing whatever else it is.
Yeah.
And it's also so easy to get obsessed with anything. I think about it kind of an 80-20 way of if you are focusing on nutrition and like you get everything dialed in and then you're like, oh, but if I have a teaspoon of cilantro, it'll do this thing or whatever. If you don't need to, and you're trying to optimize 100% of your nutrition, yet you're sitting all day long or whatever, like have all these other exposures, like get everything to 80% and then start leveling everything up. And it's a never ending journey. And like sometimes those things might shift, but to dive into sort of some of the things is like, I always chat about how people can do this with nutrition and movement, especially, but just curious as far as you give a lot of different examples, but I'd love to dive in and sort of talk about reasons why people should be thinking about this stuff and then maybe some solutions. So one that I hadn't even thought of, but it's very obvious. And I've sort of like intuitively thought of how absurd this is my whole life, but like artificial smells and scents.
Yeah.
So why is this a problem and like how should people think about this?
So if you have a need to cover up a scent in your home with artificial scents, then there's a bigger problem. And that usually means there's like toxic carpet, there's toxic mold, there's some problem in your house that may need to be addressed. Maybe that is literally just air movement or airflow with windows. But any fragrance that you're putting on your body or in your home, there are over 400 chemicals that fit under the definition of fragrance and don't have to be labeled except for stating fragrance on a package. And so we don't know we don't know the ingredients in so many things we're bringing into our home. And we also know that many of the ingredients under fragrance are things like phthalates and VOCs and sometimes formaldehyde, which are all harmful to human health specifically. And usually the endocrine system is hit the hardest. Brain health, asthma, those things can also be triggered. But we're essentially sitting in a toxic soup if we're allowing these things to be in our home in high levels. And back to that study that we talked about, which was that 90% or the average American spends 90% of their home indoors. This was done by the EPA to figure out indoor toxin exposure. So they first needed to figure out how much time the average person spends in their home. So then they can measure that with the amount of toxicity that's in the average home. And so we found out that indoor air quality is 5 to 10 times worse than air quality outside, even in major industrial US cities. It's crazy. And that's from so many things. That's from building materials. It is from, like I said, candles. It's from cleaning products. It's from cooking. Yeah. There's so many different reasons. But this is, I think, the next revolution that is happening is creating healthier indoor air. And we're seeing this become more and more popular with healthy cleaning products, with air purifiers, with people reacting to their homes.
Yeah. So basically all these different things can release small compounds into the air. You breathe this in, it goes into your body, and that doesn't just disappear.
Totally.
It does something in your body. And I mean, this goes back to my concept around you're modifying your natural environment to a significant degree. There's going to be downstream consequences. And whether like that is a lot or not a lot at all, that means just depends on the person and your amount of exposure to these stresses. Like everybody has a different exposure to everything else. Like you said, you're a little more sensitive to something. Somebody might be sensitive to something else.
Totally.
But that doesn't mean you're not going to have some sort of negative reaction to this. And so this is how I sort of view this stuff is that, again, if you're departing from a natural environment, you're screwing something up. Depends on how small or how big it is. But air quality. So if like people are like, for instance, cooking is a thing that I've seen in the past a lot. People cook a meal, they burn something, they have this smell, like you said, trying to cover another smell up. So you have chemicals in the air, and then you try to spray chemicals around it. It's like you're basically doubling your exposure to awful things.
Totally.
And so like, is there anything, like you said, there's fragrance or whatever, you have cleaning products, anything that goes in the air. Is there either a line of products or like things to look for on labels to know like, okay, this is bad, this is not bad?
Right. So there are very few true cleaning there are very few true non-toxic products out there. And I have a few certifications that I look for. The highest level of certification on a non-toxic product is a Made Safe certification. And it's by the Made Safe Corporation. They are looking at every ingredient. They're looking at how a product is made. They're testing things. It's something I really trust. So if you're looking for the highest quality, you can go on their website and find all of their certified products. I love Branch Basics because they use gentle products that you can use on your skin, but also work for your home. In terms of avoiding things, conventional chemicals, almost everything I find at Whole Foods, I'd say 95%, all of them contain things that I don't want to spray into the air in my home. And there are 1,000 chemicals to list. A lot of them, just like I said already, asthma, skin conditions, they'll accumulate in the body. But I tend to buy from smaller companies that I can get in touch with that will answer any of my questions. But the big brands still aren't doing a great job, but with quality ingredients, what they are doing a great job at is greenwashing. So, it looks free and clear and non-toxic, but it isn't. Right. They haven't stepped up to the plate yet with truly healthy ingredients.
Right. I mean, it's a simple concept. It makes it extremely hard for the consumer to choose the thing that is actually good for them. And I think another big problem about all this healthy home stuff is that the feedback loop is essentially infinite, meaning like you have no idea how it's affecting you, or like even food is tough because you eat something and maybe like you'll have some indigestion or some problems with your gut, or you'll feel low energy later on. And that's tough to sort of associate like, oh, this thing's in my environment, this bad thing's now happening to my body. And with all these small things that add up, it's like, you just never know what the things are. So that's why just like the default state of thinking is if it is man-made, try to get it out as much as possible. And like, is it a normal, natural thing? Question around like scents and stuff like that. I know a lot of my parents and my sister loves essential oils and diffusing stuff. Like, is there like a good or a bad there for scent?
If I am trying to put scent into my home, it is with essential oils. I think there are a few brands that are more trusted than others just because some essential oil companies use hexane extraction. And so you are releasing that into the air as well, or putting that onto your body, which we don't want to do. So I think some of the bigger brands like the doTERRAs and the Young Living, and then there's a few others that are made really well, but I don't trust the essential oil companies that I see at like Safeway or even the ones at Whole Foods if I haven't done my own research. But overall, I think essential oils are much better. They're a much better option than fragrance. We want to avoid fragrance at all costs just because fragrance is the wild, wild west. We don't know what is in each scent, and even each product. It can vary.
Yeah. I think that is a nice sort of segue into, I think, another industry that people have in their home but don't think about it is any sort of product that you use on your skin, whether that's like makeup for females, shaving cream, shampoos, washes, like these things that I think are part of home health just because you usually don't take them outside of the home. And it's like a function of living in a normal life and like the things you have in your house. So I guess I'm curious, and like, for instance, I use almost no products. I use a little bit of Alitura for face and skin stuff. And then I use White Oak Pasture's tallow-based soap. I think that's like the only thing I use as far as products in my house.
Yeah, I think that's super smart to use as few as possible. I always like to point out it's not just women being exposed through these products. It is children, it is men, any pets. The average conventional product is not safe. Europe has banned 1,300 chemicals from their body care products, and the US has banned 11. So that is just one example to show that our body care products are not regulated by our government. If it's on the shelf, it doesn't mean it's safe. I wish it did, but unfortunately, we have to be the gatekeepers of our own health when it comes to what we put on our skin and in our body, because the regulations are not tight. They're not tight enough. And we are seeing, toxins in umbilical cords. We are seeing hormone disruption simply because of body care products, because of how many products women are using on a daily basis and how unregulated they are. So it's something to really consider as a component of health. And I also categorize that as home health because it's where we are being exposed to most of these things.
So how do you think about choosing some of these things? Again, do you have like a recommended source where if you're trying to find a toothpaste or makeup or body wash, or like, how do you think about this?
Part of my mission is to simplify this for people. It's not easy and it's not intuitive to find products that you know are safe, because right now there's a trend in green living. And so every product is trying to prove that their product is safe and environmentally healthy and healthy for skin and bodies. So I have a few resources for personal care products that I rely on and I recommend to everyone. The first is the Environmental Working Group and EWG, and they have a database. It's called Skin Deep, where they rate any product on 1 through 10. 10 is the worst. I like for people to stay around 3 or below. And you can see every single ingredient that is in a product and what it is rated, and also what it is correlated with in terms of health outcomes, whether that be cancer or different diseases. So I really like EWG. Skin Deep. And then there's another one called Think Dirty. And this is in connection to a breast cancer nonprofit. They want women to start thinking about the chemicals they're exposed to from their body care. And so they've come out with an app, and you can take this around Target, wherever you shop, and scan different products. And a rating system will also come up for you to see if this is safe or not.
Yeah. I love Think Dirty. I don't use it that often because I just try to not use products, but people who do or don't understand, they've made it accessible and like fun to use and like really great branding. Whereas like EWG stuff is awesome, but I think a lot of people go to it, they're like, oh, I have to do this research. I'm like this paranoid person, but the Think Dirty stuff is like actually fun to interact with.
Yeah. And it's funny. I've been caught in aisles at grocery stores on those apps, and friends will walk up and be like, you would be on your Think Dirty app right now. And it just makes me laugh.
It's good to be the weird one, I think.
Yeah, totally. I'm like, I hope that next time you're picking something out, you're on your app as well.
Yeah. So skin stuff, obviously, like that's the way to do it. But how do you think about body wash, shampoo, conditioner, these things. Do you use this stuff often? And like, what is your exposure to that? Do you have any
Yeah.
clean
So these
ones?
are all still under the app, under those two apps. So very easy to look there. I still have a full makeup routine. I still use body care, just because when I find products that are safe, I don't mind using them. My husband, just like you, very minimal routine. But I still want to be able to have fun with things like lipstick and makeup without making it super crunchy. So there are a few brands that I really like. And my trick with this, to simplify it, is once I find a brand I trust, I'll buy any of their products. So if you find a few brands in your life, whether it be for makeup or even home cleaning, and you know you can trust that brand, the searching and the research can be over. Mm-hmm. So for shampoo and conditioner, I use brands like Beauty Counter. I really like Olivia Skincare for body wash, makeup, a lot of Beauty Counter, anything from Keto Beauty or Detox Market. We're really lucky because there's a movement happening with green beauty, with green home care, things that are safe for us. And stores are really creating a market for people like us who want to make sure what we bring in our life is going to be safe. And so now there are stores where I know anything they stock, I'm okay to buy. And so it's not like a restrictive, annoying process where I have to research anything. They do the research before they're stocking their online shelves.
Yeah. I mean, this stuff is just like, I think that you make a good point around, you still use makeup. You still have these routines. And when a lot of women, especially, think, oh, this stuff is bad for me, but what is my alternative? I'm going to be like some hippie chick and never, shave my armpits, things like that. And I can't be a woman and be expressive. And I think like, that part is important that I think a lot of people discount. And like talking about our natural environment, I think men and women, for as long as we go back, have been ornate with their expression of things and like using paint and dyes and stuff like that. And I think like, I have nothing against makeup. It's just so much of it is associated with these toxic chemicals. And it's really hard to pull yourself back from that.
Yeah. And I think we have to look at it as overall toxin load, right? Like I have friends who have certain lipsticks that are probably full of metals that they love, that they wear a couple times a year because it makes them feel fun and festive. And it's like their Christmas lipstick. You don't have to be 100% perfect, but if you're using daily shampoos, conditioners, lotions, makeups, lipstick while washing your dishes with conventional wash that's getting on your hands with hot soapy water, like all of these things add up. So it's about overall toxin load, not just these individual products that you use here and there sometimes.
Yeah. And resilience of a human is a big thing. So like we should be able to filter out some of this stuff. We should be resilient organisms, but the more you can lower your overall exposures is great.
Yeah.
You talked about hot water getting in there, and you got me into this water filter thing. I was like planning on doing it anyways. I'm like, whatever. It's like one of these things I'll like figure out later on, but would love to hear sort of your thoughts on like water in homes, water filtration, problems with that. I think people just assume that, I'm getting water from the city and it tastes fine, so it should be good.
Yeah. Again, just like body care, legal doesn't mean safe. So there are a lot of legal limits with water that most cities hit, and their water under scrutiny looks fine from a legal perspective, but not for our bodies and not for drinking all day, every day, or not for our little children to be bathing in every single night. Water in the US, I think it is a public health crisis. I think that we're going to look back on the levels of chemicals, metals, agricultural runoff and pharmaceuticals that are in our water. We're going to look back one day and be able to connect our health problems partially to the water that we have exposed ourselves to every single day. So I personally believe, and this changes depending where you are in the country, where you source your water, but most public sourced water in the US is contaminated with a variety of things. In the Pacific Northwest, there's really high arsenic in the soil. So they're going to see that in their water. Here, it's going to be something different. So you really have to look at your water and decide if you need filtering or not. And again, there are some places where that need is a little bit lower, but in most cities, we're in Austin, something to at least filter and purify the drinking water that you are consuming, hopefully around 100 ounces a day, every single day. Something to clean that up is really important. And then I also started looking at chlorine and how that turns into a gas in our shower. And most city water is chlorinated because chlorine kills other bacteria in the water. And so our chlorine exposure every single day, that adds up. And when I really started digging into water, I just started seeing, oh my goodness, this is unregulated, unsafe, and another piece to the health puzzle that most people aren't talking about.
I mean, it's just shocking that this is the fundamental building block of like most of our cells and everything in our body and required. Like you can go without food far longer than you can go without water. Like we need it to live. And I mean, so the way I think about health stuff in general is like the more absurd it is to me is when it comes to like, you have no choice. And so for example, if you're out, like, yeah, there's like special water bottles and stuff like that. But if you're out like traveling or whatever else, especially in the US, like you said, and you have no access to clean water, like there's no alternative. There's no alternative at all, period. Like you have no choice but to be poisoned essentially, which sounds insane when you think about it. But I mean, the same thing with light exposure. You're on a plane, you get off an airport, you go to a store or something like that, and have these crazy fluorescent lights at midnight. Like you have no choice but to be blasted with that light or to drink this water. Like it is, like it seems so easy, just like, yes, drink clean water. The availability for clean water is so much worse than people think. Like you brought this to my attention earlier in the year. Like I started digging into it, like you said, like it's shocking to me. And the fact, like, again, like you said, the regulations are only basically to kill pathogens. So bacteria and viruses, et cetera. So there's like typically UV light, but then they add in all this chlorine just to be safe. But there's no regulation around chlorine of a level that brings it down so that you're not consuming it. And so you say, okay, yeah, we did our job. The regulations just said that we had to kill the pathogens, but we don't have to worry about anything else in here. It is insanity.
Yeah. And that's drinking water. So consuming chlorine is one thing, but you actually inhale 10 times more chlorine once it turns into a gas in your shower.
Which like with heat and coming out at such a fast rate.
The vaporization. It is really interesting. Most people aren't talking about that, but I look at it as, oh my goodness, there are little children with much lower toxin loads and ability. They have a much lower ability to process toxins in their body, especially until they're 2. And they're sitting in these baths every night, hot, warm water with chlorine and breathing that in. And I take baths all the time. It's part of my self-care routine. And I was like, wow, I'm sitting in chlorine. I'm sitting in toxins. My pores are open right now. So it just became this thing where like, it's not just drinking water. It's all the water in our house. Yeah. And I'm a big advocate for whole house filters or people filtering their showers or baths. And there are affordable ways to do that. You can get a bath filter or a shower filter for $30 to $60. You can get a quality drinking filter for around $300. So there are ways to do it without like disrupting your yard and putting in the rocket ship whole house filter that we both have. But it's really important to look into. Another thing on the access to water, there are times when it feels like you either drink tap water, which I don't like doing, or you go in to 7-Eleven on a road trip and you have to get water that's been in a plastic bottle for who knows how many years. And the BPA and the plastics, have leached into that liquid and you're drinking. So you really are between a rock and a hard place so much of the time when it comes to drinking water.
Yeah, I refuse to drink bottled water anywhere. It's like if it's not in glass or like even in aluminum, like I would prefer not to be in a can, but I think it's better than a plastic bottle. Like I'll drink, like there's some of these like new sort of like eco-friendly aluminum ones. Like it's okay. It's like better than plastic, I think, and like these cheap plastic like Aquafina or Dasani bottles, especially like the thinner and crinklier that plastic is, the worse it's going to be for you, just as a general rule.
Totally.
Like this is where like, I mean, even on airplanes or whatever, and they're like, hey, you want a free bottle of water? I was like, no. And like, I would rather drink the tap water from the drinking fountain. I don't know if you have a different perspective on this than the bottled water that's been sitting there for, like you said, probably years.
Yeah. Well, most of the water in a water bottle that you'll find is just tap water. Yeah. So it's a double it's a double hit of plastic and whatever you're getting in that tap water that they filled the bottle with.
Yeah. I mean, it's just shocking to me again, talking about how easy this is, but how hard it is to actually implement. Airports are like the worst offender, like gas stations, like you're talking about. There's like every now and then I see a glass bottle at an airport and I like celebrate. I'm like the bougie guy trying to like get only like glass water bottles. Like,
I know, right?
It's important.
Totally.
And
I'll put 12 Mountain Valley water bottles in my car before a road trip, or I'll fill up a glass gallon with water because I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. But this is a really important conversation for everyone. It's especially important for a few different populations. One being people with thyroid disease, because the thyroid has an affinity for toxin. So we'll see a lot of toxin accumulation in the thyroid, which can then make hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's worse. And so I really like to make sure that people who have any sort of thyroid issues are aware of this, that one of the best things you can do for your health, besides going gluten-free, eating real food, taking proper or correct medication if you need it, is also lowering your toxin exposure. And then also people who are preparing for pregnancy, this is huge. And anyone else with chronic health conditions, I can't stress enough that this can make a difference, and you actually can get to a place where you can detox enough toxins and stop the input where you can feel different.
Yeah. So just to touch on detox quickly, I mean, there's like a buzzword that gets overblown quite a lot in the health arena, and like, oh, take this wheatgrass shot to detox. And like, how do you think about that in general? Because when we're talking about people, I think look at toxins, that word is the made up, like it doesn't actually exist,
right?
Because like we can't see and measure things, and things like should be like in a big poison barrel. But how do you sort of like see this detox toxin relationship? And
I have a lot of thoughts. The first, and what I tell everyone, is your body is detoxing 24 hours a day. Like your liver is working whether or not you are on a juice fast or a detox. So remember that you're designed to detox things that aren't serving you. This day and age, we're overwhelmed with more toxins than we ever have been. There's more chemicals registered with the EPA than ever before, a lot of them unregulated. And when we just look in bodies and our health in general, there's a toxin connection. I eat very, very high percentage organic, like 95% organic. I take really good care of my body. I just did an environmental toxin test and I was super surprised to see pretty high amounts of different pesticides and rocket fuel and weird shit that I don't know how I was exposed to. Yeah. So it's out there, and whether we're breathing it in on, walks on pavement, or we fly a lot, so we're accumulating things that way, all of us are inputting toxins every single day. And so I do think that having basic foundational routines around detox is a really important thing. I don't think that means like going on a juice cleanse once a month, every month. I think it means moving your body and making sure you're sweating. I think it means utilizing a sauna when you can. I think it means eating cruciferous vegetables daily if possible. Little things like that just to help boost the detox process in general. Yeah.
I mean, like you said, it's unavoidable. And the question is, what is the level? And what is your amount of exposure? And if you live in New York City and you have a lot of these problems, it's going to be different than if you live out in like some rural area and you're breathing a lot of fresh air. And like, are you stressed? Are you eating poorly? You're doing all these things. So it's another way to think about health, and all the ways it's really challenging. But yeah, I mean, I think before we freak out so many people about that their house is killing them, probably wrap up and just let people know, because you have tons of resources on this stuff. So wherever they can find that would be amazing.
Yeah, for now, and this is changing. For now, my website is www.frolicandflow.me, and you can find me on Instagram at frolicandflow. I have so many resources on non-toxic living because, again, one of my missions is to make this simple for people. I know a lot of people don't want to do the research. It takes time, it takes effort. They just want a trusted place where they can find safe products. So I've created that, and then my podcast, Doing It Different, we talk about this as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research and books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in and your support of the Natural State Podcast.